Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Welcome to Online Lecture 4A here in your Biology 140 semester. So guys, here in Online Lecture 4A, we'll be covering slides 2 through about slide 16. We're going to be looking at the topic of biomes today. So we'll first talk about where biomes are located in the different parts of the world. We'll talk about what determines what type of biome you have in a certain area. And what in the world is a biome anyway? Well, folks, these will all be topics that we'll be talking about in today's online lecture. Again, online lecture 4A, looking at the first 16 slides here in chapter 5. Let's go ahead and start here on this first picture. Got this attractive young Kenyan child here. And you can see the child is holding a little tree here. And that tree is very significant. Does anybody know what this is about, this picture here? Well, this picture is about the wonderful Green Belt movement. You remember talking about the Green Belt movement back in chapter 1? Remember we talked about Maathai. Wangari Maathai, it's M-A-A-T-H-A-I, I believe her last name is spelled. Well, anyway, Maathai was a major influence on the start of the Green Belt movement, which began here in Africa in an effort to restore not only ecological health, but economic health. This is a great success story that has significantly improved the economics of Kenya and the ecological health of Kenya as well. So what did they do? Well, the Green Belt movement was started by a group of women, again, including Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Prize. She and these women, I believe it was in the 70s, if I recall correctly, began to plant trees there in Africa. And by planting trees, this allowed a lot more fuel wood to be available. It also reduced soil erosion. It also increased habitat for animals. And one of the greatest things that came was the fact that women in Africa have to retrieve wood for fuel. So I don't know if y'all knew that, but the job of gathering wood and water is primarily done by women. And so the women will have to travel a long way sometimes to have to get to wood or water, which causes them to, obviously it's stressful physically to have to walk further. It's also more dangerous when you're walking, you have to covering longer distances as women, and really for anybody. And so by planting more trees, they don't have to walk as far, and by not walking as far, obviously they're helping themselves, certainly in the area of security and those kinds of things. Also, there's less tribal warfare when there's more resources available. And especially in places in the developing world, right? Resources are severely limited there, and by having severely limited resources, we are extremely dependent on what nature can provide us with. And so this is a huge success story. It has spread beyond Kenya now. It's gone to several other parts of the world. Great sort of success story. I encourage you to read that there in chapter 5. Let's move on now to the outline. We'll talk about terrestrial biomes mainly in today's online lecture. We'll eventually get to marine, freshwater, and then human disturbances. Let's first talk about biomes. This is the major topic here in Chapter 5. Biomes are areas sharing similar climate, topographic, and soil conditions, and thus the same basic types of biological communities. So, for example, a biome would be the temperate deciduous biome. We live in the temperate deciduous biome. Now, what in the world is that? Well, in all across the temperate deciduous forest biome, you have similar climate. What is the climate like here? Well, you could describe the climate, right? We have relatively high moisture, right? We have pretty constant rain. It rains in the summer quite a bit, rains in the winter, rains in the fall and the spring, right? There's never really a dry season. The driest season we might experience is something like maybe October, but even then we get quite a bit of rain. So we have pretty consistent rainfall. How about our temperatures, right? There are 4 seasons. We have winter, and we definitely have had winter lately here in the spring 2015 semester. And then we've had, we have a distinct spring, we have a very distinct summer, and distinct fall. and then we see the leaves fall off the trees in the autumn. So those types of things would characterize our biome in terms of temperature and precipitation. And it's temperature and precipitation that are among the most important determinants in biome distribution. So it's your temperature and your precipitation pattern that will determine where your biome is located and what biome you are in. We are in the temperate deciduous biome here in western North Carolina because of our temperature and precipitation patterns. Again, 4 seasons, a very temperate ecosystem, a very temperate environment where we have 4 distinct seasons and abundant precipitation, right? And not extremely harsh winters here. Other biomes we'll see have very little temperature or very little change in temperature and very little precipitation. Let's now move on to the last point here. Temperature-controlled biomes often occur in latitudinal bands. This is just saying that as you look at the globe, you'll find that biomes that are affected by temperature, which would include just about every biome, almost every one of them is strongly influenced by temperature, are often occurring in latitudinal bands. Now, what is latitude? Anybody remember? Latitude is how far north or south that you live. Our latitude is about 35.5 degrees north. 0 degrees is the equator, right? And the southern border of the United States is close to 30 degrees latitude, and the northern border of the United States is about 50 degrees latitude, right, at least of the continental U.S. And so we'll find as we move north or south, we find latitudinal bands or biomes located along the latitudes. Like, for example, you'll find most of the deserts of the world along 30 degrees north. There's a reason for that. You'll find that tropical rainforests are typically between 0, the equator, and about 15 degrees north and south. So all of the tropical rainforests are located right along the equator. So that's what we mean by temperature-controlled biomes often occur in latitudinal bands. Again, bands that are a particular distance north or south of the equator. You can see this very nice picture of the world's biomes, and I will start to highlight some now. Notice the tropical rainforests, all between 15 degrees north and 15 degrees south. This is the Tropic of Cancer here, guys. Okay, so that's your Tropic of Cancer. This is the Tropic of Capricorn. And again, about 15 degrees north here for the Tropic of Cancer, 15 degrees south for the Tropic of Capricorn, and most of your tropical rainforests are located between these 2 bands, as you can see, the dark green. Then you notice the deserts of the world. Deserts are primarily located along 30 degrees north, primarily, which is actually right about here. This is about 30 degrees north, and 30 degrees north kind of goes right along here, and you can see desert, 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 and then even at 30 degrees south, you find quite a bit of desert here, and even down here in South America. So you can see these latitudinal bands. How about boreal forests, northern forests, like forests that have a lot of spruce and fir? All of them are located way up here, close to 60 degrees north, and maybe down as possibly as far as 50 degrees north. But they're all pretty much in that band, way, way up here, Siberia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Canada, etc., parts of Alaska. And then, of course, some of those boreal forests are found along the spine of the Rockies and even along the Appalachians. So these are your biomes, and this is a big picture view. It's a good little picture to study. Let me get rid of all my markings. I want you to just kind of take it in. If you need to pause this lecture for a second, just kind of get a good idea of where the world's biomes are located. You'll get a pretty good idea of the big picture. Again, I also want to point out the temperate deciduous forests. Broadleaf or mixed forest, which is temperate deciduous forest. That's what we are in. So notice this large area of the eastern U.S., most of western Europe, even southeast China, parts of Australia are all have temperate deciduous forests. So they will have the 4 seasons. They'll have the beautiful fall foliage that we get to enjoy here in the eastern United States. All right? Okay, folks, well, let's move on now to the next slide. So this slide reveals that biomes and the location of biomes is determined by precipitation, which is shown on the y-axis, and temperature on the x-axis. So where will we find temperate forest? Well, we're pretty much in the middle. So we have a pretty good amount of rain, but not as much rain as the temperate rainforest or tropical rainforest. We're also not as hot, let's say, as deserts typically, in most deserts. We're not as hot as tropical seasonal forests or tropical rainforests or tropical thorn scrub and woodland. We're kind of in the middle in terms of temperature. So our average annual temperature is close to between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius, and our precipitation, again, is kind of in the middle, whereas deserts, very much at the bottom of precip and very high on temperature. Tropical rainforest, extremely high in precipitation, way up here on the high parts of the y-axis, and pretty far to the right, too, on the x, which means it's very hot, too, in tropical rainforest. So as you can see, the temperature and precipitation pattern will determine which biome is located where. Let's now move on to the next slide. This shows the effect of vertical zonation or vertical zoning, where you can see the change in biomes isn't just dependent on latitude, how far north or south you are. Biomes are also heavily determined by your elevation. And so, for example, here in California, we have Fresno, California, and Mount Whitney. Oh, that's not that far, folks. This is only 100 kilometers. What is 100 kilometers? Oh, it's only about 62 miles. Okay, so just 62 miles, not a big deal if you're driving your car. 1 hour drive from Fresno to Mount Whitney if you had a good interstate there. And so down here at Fresno, we have shrub desert. It's very dry. You're in a desert biome, cacti, etc., barrel cactus here, and very succulent plants. Then as you drive toward Mount Whitney, you increase your elevation, you start hitting grasslands. In fact, you hit temperate grasslands that have 4 seasons with a pretty cold season as well. Then as you continue to drive up towards Mount Whitney, you actually start hitting oak woodlands or temperate savannas. And the trees are very spread out. It's fairly dry. Still, then it gets even wetter as you go in higher elevations, and it gets cooler as well, and you actually start hitting oak forest, and they actually have a temperate deciduous band, which would be very much like this area where we live here in western North Carolina. And then you actually start hitting pine, spruce, fir, or boreal forest way down here in California. And as we pointed out, the boreal forest or northern forests, like where you have your spruces and firs found in Siberia and Canada, can actually be found even far south as Southern California, thanks to the elevation. And just like we have spruce fir forest at our high elevations here in western North Carolina. And then as you continue on up the mountain, you start hitting spruce fir, deeper, more like a taiga, where the ground is frozen a good part of the year. And then finally you hit tundra, where the ground remains frozen for most of the year. You have what's called permafrost. And you don't really have many trees. You actually get above the tree line. You start getting into small plants and lichens. So, yeah, what an amazing change. So biomes aren't just dependent on latitude. Temperature and precipitation patterns are certainly a powerful effect, but it's not all about latitude. It certainly can be about elevation as well. And we certainly have a change of biomes as we go from here in Morganton to the top of Mount Mitchell. We'll definitely see big changes, and you've probably noticed those before. So this is all vertical zonation, the term applied to vegetation zones defined by altitude. Again, as you go up the mountain, it gets cooler, and of course, it gets wetter as well. Let's go ahead and begin to look at some of our various biomes, starting with the tropical rainforests. So tropical rainforests are very humid regions in the tropics that support one of the most complex and biological rich biomes. So this is a biome that's characterized by very high temperature and very high precipitation, very humid, typically found between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, as we looked on that map. And it's extremely biologically rich. You will find very high biodiversity here in tropical rainforest, unmatched by any other biome in the world. You have a majority of the species in the world living in tropical rainforest, despite the fact that the world is only covered by 6% tropical rainforest. So we have 6% of the world is covered by tropical rainforest, yet let's have a little issue here with my pointer. Let me back up here, folks. But yet the Earth is covered 6% tropical rainforest. The Earth, most of the species of the Earth is found in this biome. So I don't do a good job of multitasking, guys. Let me find my pointer. Let's see what happened to the pointer here. There we go. Okay, let's see if I can get this thing back here. Okay, should pull up here. Okay, now we're going back again. Let me reverse, and let's see if we can get. Okay, now we're far back enough. I think we can get to it. Okay, finally. Oh wow, that took a little while. I appreciate your patience, and I think we're back. Okay, now, so as I was saying, we're only at 6% coverage, yet a very large percentage of the organisms in the world are found in the tropical rainforest. Why? Well, it's a very stable area. We think that, for eons of time, very long periods of time, tropical rainforests have existed as biomes. It's been very wet and very humid there for a very long period of time, guys, and that's not true for a lot of other biomes. Like, for example, the last ice age probably did not affect tropical rainforests, but would have heavily affected temperate deciduous forests like where we live. So our area would have been very cold and very devastated by the last ice age. And points northward would have been heavily influenced by the last ice age, actually being covered entirely by glaciers. And tropical rainforests never had those influences. So we've had ample rainfall and uniform temperatures for very long periods of time, and we don't see that the environment would have been suppressed for any long period of time because of some historical cold, and we don't see the cold temperatures really infiltrating this area at all during the entire year. So we have cloud forest, high mountains where fog and mist keep vegetation continually wet. This is just a subcategory of tropical rainforest. Again, these are all high elevation areas, like places like in Central America, South America. We also find cloud forests along a lot of the islands along the tropics. And then, of course, the tropical rainforests themselves, where we have lots of rainfall, over 80 inches of rain a year or 200 centimeters, and temperatures are always warm or even hot year-round. But they're not as hot as places further north or south. Tropical rainforests actually tend to be a little bit cooler than their neighboring biomes. Why? I bet you can guess. Well, because of the abundant cloud cover and rainfall. So they tend to be a little cooler than their neighbors, the deserts. Deserts typically border or get pretty close to tropical rainforests. There's usually a biome between them as you gradiate, as there's a little gradient from very wet to very dry. And so there's usually one little biome or two between tropical rainforests and deserts. But despite the fact that deserts are further north, like 30 degrees north, tropical rainforests down at zero, you'd say, oh, tropical rainforests are in the equator. They ought to be the hottest places in the world. Tropical rainforests are not the hottest places in the world thanks to the cloud cover and abundant rainfall. Let's now move on to the next slide. Let's check out some more points to make about tropical rainforests. You might be surprised, though we do have extremely high biodiversity here in the tropical rainforest, and we have so much moisture and lots of organic material, lots of plant matter. You think, oh gosh, these areas must have wonderful, wonderful soils. Actually, they have very thin, acidic, and nutrient-poor soils. Why is the soil so poor in tropical rainforest? Why, folks? Anybody have any ideas? Well, you have so much rain. The rain washes out a lot of the nutrients, just washes them away. Also, there is very rapid decomposition in nutrient cycling. Because it's so warm and wet, bacteria and fungi are able to break things down at an incredible pace. And so the nutrients, again, like nitrogen and carbon and all the various elements, the carbon cycle that we studied, phosphorus, are broken down very quickly and recycled continually. 90% nutrients are actually tied up in the bodies of living organisms. So most of your nutrients are actually in the leaves of the trees, in the bark, in the wood, in the actual animals' bodies, rather than being in the soil. As soon as it gets in the soil, it's very quickly broken down, washed away, leached out, or absorbed by more plants. So the cycling is very fast here. The soil cannot support continued cropping and cannot resist erosion from frequent rains. So, unfortunately, a lot of people will farm tropical rainforests in developing countries, and most developing countries, or at least most tropical rainforests, include developing countries. There's not a lot of developed countries here in tropical rainforest. They tend to be developing, and so the folks in these areas tend to utilize the land to make a living. And as they utilize the land, they, of course, resort to farming. And as they farm, usually they get 1 year of growth out of their crops, like a good corn crop the first year, and then after that, there's very, very little nutrients left in the soil. And because of that, then, of course, their corn crop is very poor after the first year. There's rapid deforestation occurring as people move into the forest. So we have what's called subsistence agriculture, slash and burn agriculture, where folks go in, slash and cut down wood, sell that off, plant crops, and then once the soil has been deprived after even just a year, they burn the area and then move on to another area. And so this has resulted in huge losses in tropical rainforest coverage. Again, we're down to 6% of the surface of the earth covered by them. And since 1960, 50% of our tropical rainforests have disappeared. So just since 1960, not that long ago, half of our tropical rainforests are gone. So this biome has been severely affected. And there's another, again, great little statistic. 1/2 to 2/3 of all species of terrestrial plants and animals live in tropical rainforest, exclamation point. So even though it's only 6% of the coverage of the globe, 1/2 to 2/3, 50 to 67% of all species in the terrestrial world live in tropical rainforest. This means we really need to try to protect tropical rainforests. It's just such a small area relative. I mean, just doesn't cover that much of the world, but almost such a huge percentage of your species are found here. And some of those species harbor very, very important drugs. I believe that a lot of these species, especially the plants found here, have incredible medicinal potential. Okay, guys? We've only tested 5,000 species of plants for medicinal purposes, yet there are 330,000 species of plants. So we believe that there are probably some plants out there that might hold something like a cure for cancer. And so one of the reasons we want to protect tropical rainforests is because we are trying to protect what could become a very crucial, say, an organism that may have a great impact on human health. And so there's a lot of potential here. And, of course, some of these species that disappear could cause a bunch of other species to go extinct. That's another reason we want to protect these areas. And tropical rainforests absorb huge amounts of CO2. They do combat global warming. You see, folks, tropical rainforest, unlike the forest around here, always absorbs CO2. So year-round, carbon dioxide is being absorbed by carbon dioxide is being absorbed by tropical rainforest. In our area, the trees take a break. They only work about maybe 8 months of the year, maybe even as little as 7 months out of the year. And then they take this nice little break during the winter, and they don't absorb much CO2 at all. Even our evergreens don't absorb a whole lot of CO2 during the winter, but tropical rainforests work 24/7, 365 days a year, absorbing CO2 and, of course, giving out precious oxygen. This is a beautiful picture of one. This would be a cloud forest. Again, one of those high elevation areas, beautiful and very wet. Holds a lot of amphibian species, lots of plant species, incredible insect diversity as well. Notice year-round, shaded months are above freezing, so year-round, no freezing temperatures. January through December, never do we have a freezing temperature. Precip, extremely high, at least 50 millimeters to as high as 300 millimeters, or in terms of inches, that would be, oh gosh, let's see, about, you're looking at probably 40 inches of rain, minimal, very minimal, all the way on up to 80 plus, maybe even 100 or more inches of rain a year. You can see there's a moisture surplus year-round. There's always a surplus in moisture. So we always have more moisture falling on the land than the land can even absorb and take in. So we have a lot of runoff and rivers, things like that, like the Amazon. And you can see the temperature basically doesn't fluctuate much at all, and it remains very high. Temperature averages up around close to 30 degrees Celsius, and notice the very little amount of fluctuation from season to season. Okay, let's look at the next biome. So tropical rainforest, very interesting biome. Wish we could talk more about them. There's so much to talk about there. But let's move on to tropical seasonal forests. So if we move a little further away from tropical rainforest and we go a little bit further north or a little bit further south away from the equator, we'll start hitting tropical seasonal forests where we have a wet season and a dry season with hot temperatures year-round. So it's always hot here, but you have a wet and dry season. And as you go into the dry season, the trees actually lose their leaves. You see, folks, we lose our leaves here in this area because it, of course, gets colder. And with the cold air, we have what's called sort of like a drought, where the soil becomes cold and then eventually it freezes, and it kind of mimics sort of like a drought situation. And cold air is very dry as well, so that's why our trees lose their leaves. It's more about water retention and water sort of conservation. Well, in the same kind of idea here in tropical seasonal forests, except we are going into an actual dry season that's also hot. So we have brown and very dormant much of the year, and they become very green during the rainy season. And they lose lots of leaves, and so they are typically deciduous, losing their leaves when it is dry. Few of the tropical seasonal forests remain in their natural state as humans use fire to clear the land in the dry season and settle there. So this area has been pretty well settled. There's a couple reasons why people prefer tropical seasonal forest over tropical rainforest. Anybody have any ideas of why we have more cities and development here, higher human populations? Well, for one, when you lose your leaves and you have deciduous trees, the soil actually becomes pretty rich. And so compared to tropical rainforest, tropical seasonal forests are much more, soils are much richer and much more supportive of crops. So if you can grow crops better here, you can have a livelihood better. You can grow more food. So that's the first thing. Much better soil is much better crop growing. Another reason is we have much fewer disease in tropical seasonal forests. We don't have as much bacterial, fungal, and protistan diversity. And so you don't see quite as many disease-causing organisms in this area. Fewer mosquitoes, fewer cases of malaria. So overall, this is a healthier place to live as well. So better food, more health, better soils, etc. More people have settled this area as a result. So it's been a little bit more affected by human permanent habitation. Again, soil is very rich because of the leaves falling off the trees, and then very productive for land, again, for agriculture. So we see this place to being a lot more affected in terms of development. All right, let's go now to tropical savannas and grasslands. Okay, so if we go to a slightly drier area, as we move from tropical seasonal forests, we start hitting tropical savannas and grasslands. This is an area that's even drier. They have sparse tree cover, are called savannas. So if we have grasslands and there is sparse tree cover, so trees spread out, it's called a savanna. So think about the African savanna, right? When you think of like a safari, picture those acacia trees. You know those typical African trees, they're really pretty. Yeah, the acacia trees are usually very spread out, and that's what we call savanna. And then if we go even drier, we'll actually hit a tropical grassland. Okay, so again, the trend is, say, tropical rainforest, then tropical seasonal forest, then you start hitting tropical savannas, and then finally hitting grasslands as you get drier and drier and drier. And of course, the next thing to come would be a desert. So this is the gradient from tropical rainforest to desert. Let's now see what else we've got to say about the savannas and grasslands. Rainfall amounts do not support forests. Again, we don't have dense forests. We do have a lot of grasses, and of course they are very good for large mammals. So we find a lot of large mammals here in tropical savannas and grasslands, large herbivores like wildebeest and zebras and kudus and impalas, and then we have lots of large predators that feed on them. So it's a great place to observe wildlife. And of course it's more open too, so you can see them. Again, this whole dry season is prone to fire. Fire is a major disturbance in tropical savannas, grasslands, and even tropical seasonal forests. Plants with deep, long-lived roots and other adaptations to survive drought, heat, and fire are found here. Lots of them have sharp thorns, thorns to keep herbivores from eating them. And many migratory grazers, such as antelope, wildebeest, bison, are found here. And again, along with those grazers come the big predators, such as lions and tigers and bears. No, not so much bears. Lions, tigers, cheetahs, right? Those typical African safari-type wildlife you've seen before. Here's a great picture of the tropical savanna. And again, it's not a grassland. This one is a savanna because there are a few trees. Again, these acacia trees, again, very spread out. Lots of grassland, though, around those trees, and the wildebeest enjoying all this wonderful grass. Notice that much of the year the moisture cannot keep up with evaporation, so we have very dry season, and then we have this little spike, and we have this really, really wet season right here in the middle. And notice that year-round, the temperature remains above freezing. So we do see a little fluctuation in temperature. The wet season is also the coolest season. So all that rainfall and cloud cover cools the temperatures down. And the dry season is where the temperatures are highest. But there's not that much fluctuation in temperature as compared to what we'll see in temperate areas like where we live. And so there's little fluctuation here, but a great deal of fluctuation in terms of precip. And of course, these organisms have to take huge advantage of the wet season when there's plentiful grass available. Okay, let's now move on to the very last biome that we'll discuss today. In this online lecture, let's talk about deserts. So now as we get past the tropical grasslands and we get to even drier areas, we start hitting very low moisture areas, less than 30 centimeters per year of precip. That is very infrequent and very unpredictable from year to year. Very wide daily and seasonal temperature fluctuations. So it gets really hot, guys, in the desert during the day, but it can get quite cool at night. So daily fluctuations can be very dramatic. Not necessarily seasonal. Not all deserts are going to have real change in temperatures seasonally, but some do, as we'll see the high deserts, especially like in Utah and places where deserts are high in elevation and pretty high in latitude. But most deserts don't have tremendous fluctuations seasonally, but they have tremendous fluctuation daily. Again, very hot in the day, can be quite cold at night. So you might hit 100 degrees in the day, but you might go down to 55 at night. Plants exhibit all types of water conservation characteristics, like very juicy water-storing stems. We call those succulent plants. Very thick epidermis, a very thick waxy cuticle to reduce water loss, and a very high salt tolerance, as well as all kinds of thorns. Herbivores love to eat these plants, of course, one, for their nutrition, and two, for their water. And so thorns are heavily covered on these various plants here. And so also, what about deserts? Well, many plants bloom and set seeds only after spring rains. So these plants are almost dormant for a large period of time, and they will become very active just during your seasonal rains. So there's sometimes a little bit of a rainy season in the desert, but it'll be very, relatively still pretty dry. Like we have the monsoons. You guys have heard of monsoons in Arizona, New Mexico, and Southern California. We'll call it the monsoonal flow. That happens usually, late August, maybe starts in late July, probably basically late July through maybe early September. You start seeing these monsoonal rains hitting places like Phoenix. And that's when you'll see the plants bloom and set seed. And, of course, they could do that in spring as well, but that's usually a pretty dry time there in places like Arizona. Animals have all types of adaptations to deal with the heat and the lack of rainfall. Many are nocturnal, so coming out at night, avoiding the heat. They also have kidneys that can really conserve water. They concentrate their urine, and when they do droppings and feces and things like that, they're very dry. So think of like gerbils, kangaroo rats. They have really incredible concentration in their urine, and then when they do go number two, it's always really dry. So they're not losing a lot of water as they go to the bathroom. And Again, being nocturnal helps, but also digging down in the soil is good too. So a lot of animals in the desert dig down in the soil where it's cooler, and so a lot of them are burrowing animals. Deserts are very vulnerable because the vegetation grows very slowly, right? If you don't have a lot of moisture, you don't have a lot of rain, you have very slow growing vegetation, and that is damaged by off-road vehicles. It can take decades for desert soils to recover. So tanks that have driven across deserts, like in wartime or just when the military happened to have a base around the desert, those tank tracks and the damage that they create has still left impressions 50 years later. So deserts are very vulnerable. It takes a long time for them to recover. If you destroy several acres of saguaro cactus, those big cactuses in the southwest U.S., you destroy those and you destroy that area, it will take more than 100 years to get what you had before, maybe even longer. So that's why the desert biome is very delicate. Overgrazing can be a big problem where we have livestock destroying plants of the southern Sahara, like in the grasslands, the tropical grasslands, and where you have tropical grasslands without plants, the land cannot retain what little rainfall there is, and it becomes more barren. So we have what's called desertification. Desertification, where the desert overtakes tropical grasslands. And so we're seeing deserts expand, especially in the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is definitely expanding southward, and we humans are helping that because that biome between desert and tropical savanna is tropical grassland. And grasslands are great places to have cattle. Unfortunately, those cattle destroy those grasses. Those grasses can't hang on to the soil. Those grasses can't hang on to the water. It becomes much hotter and drier, and then deserts take over. So this is another big conservation issue here. Here's a great picture of a desert biome that's relatively undisturbed. You've got some pretty mature cacti. Again, the very thick, juicy, succulent plants here. Lots of thorny plants as well. And again, very vulnerable to development and certainly pretty big fluctuations in daily temperatures. This particular desert biome has a pretty good amount of change in seasonal temperature as well. So quite hot in the middle of the year here, and then quite cooler during these periods, but almost no freezing. This desert biome, most desert biomes, we don't see freezing temperatures here at all, according to this particular legend here. But those high deserts do have lots of freezing temperatures, and we'll talk more about high deserts later in the semester. So guys, we'll wrap it up here. I've got a quick little video for you to watch on tropical rainforests. Let's go ahead and erase everything. And let's go ahead and look at this little video on tropical rainforest. Again, it's just a beautiful sort of sampling of the wonders of the tropical rainforest. And notice the rich biodiversity found there. All right, folks. Very beautiful and peaceful. You'll find that when it came to those elephants, they're not really tropical rainforest mammals. Elephants are more tropical savanna. But most of the organisms shown in this are tropical rainforest species. Yeah, tropical rainforests are not really known for their large mammals. They actually don't have huge mammals. It's hard for large mammals to get around in those thick vegetation. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this online lecture. If you have any questions for me, just bring your questions to class. Or you can always email me at mspath@wpcc.edu. I look forward to seeing you in class. Take care.